Going to talk about temperature today. One of the things that sparked my idea to talk about temperature today is because the outside temperature here where we live today is 10 below zero. And this morning I woke up at 3:30 and I looked at the thermometer and it was 32 above, and by 6:30 it was down to 6 below zero. Well, I'm not going to just talk about that, but the earlier part of my life, the early years, my teen years, into my 20s and so into my 30s, I saw a lot of situations where we lived to do with temperature. Some really cold temperatures. Now, in this day and age, 10 below zero, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty cold. But it's not near as cold as some of the days that I've experienced real cold. Early years, I lived another 17 miles further up the valley here from Cody. Lived, way out into the country. And we had everything that we needed. We had everything to keep warm. We had, a couple of garages that were heated to be able to keep warm. Earlier in the years, we had a situation where our 6x6 army truck that we had a snowplow on and an A-frame winch on, and and one thing another, that couldn't be parked inside in the early years. We had to keep it outside. And basically, if it was going to be cold, we paid attention to weather forecasts on a weather channel on the radio. We had no other type of receptions of any kind whatsoever where we lived. Nothing but a radio to listen to what the temperatures might be. We just simply loosened up the connections on the battery and took the battery out of the vehicle and put it inside in a warm shop on a charger. And some of these 30 to 40 degree below zero mornings, maybe even colder, we would take a little country club beer can and cut the top out of it and pour about a half of an inch of denatured alcohol into that little can and set it underneath the oil pan of the truck and throw a match in it. That would burn, and just as it burned itself out, we knew that it heated the oil pan considerably, so that the vehicle would crank a little bit better because it thinned the oil. We'd run out there, lift the hood, set the battery in there, twist the cables on there, and jump in and crank up the truck. And maybe we had to sit there with the hood open and nurse a little bit. Maybe give it a little squirt of gas in the carburetor, or maybe perhaps, some ether, some starting fluid to get the vehicle started. There was extreme colds. There was a year in the early 60s when I was living there at the home place, and we had six weeks of extreme cold, and I'm talking about extreme cold for Wyoming or most anywhere. It was 56 below zero every night, within a degree or two of that, for 6 straight weeks, and never warmed up above 39 below zero ever during the day. And this has been going on for 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, the temperature dropped in the night from 56 to 63 below zero for about 6 hours. And in 39 hours, the temperature rose from 63 below zero to 39 degrees above. Now this is a change. We had a river running within 100 and some yards of our home, and we heard we heard explosions. We heard, you know, that warm temperature broke up the ice in the river. Ice was more than several feet, 2.5, 3 feet thick in the river, from cold, cold, cold for 6 weeks. Things started thawing, things started breaking up. It sounded like anti-aircraft cannons going off with the ice breaking up in the river. This is the kind of cold. There were many, many days, as I say, 6 straight weeks of this kind of cold. It broke. We never saw anything like that again. We saw a lot of years when it was down to around 40 below zero. But that 56 down to 63 was a real experience. And our house was situated about 40 yards from our shop and our garage. We had to push snow there with a snow pusher after we basically plowed with the plow around to basically finish things out. And we were finishing things up one morning, and it was about not even 9 o'clock yet, and all of a sudden I saw a movement, and a guy from the next place down 3 miles away pulled in. It was 56 below zero, and he was on a skidoo. He was bundled up. As I say, I saw a movement. I didn't hear the skidoo. You see, when it gets real, real cold, you don't hear sound like you do normally. It basically is described as freezing the sound. And he was bundled up and just about frozen. Left the skidoo running. He didn't dare want to shut it off. It's amazing that he was able to travel that far on a cold, cold morning. And anyway, he came in, you know, to see us because he and his family, he and his wife and young children, had 4 or 5 children. They were running out of food. We had to help them. They were broke. So my grandparents gave him some food and one thing and another, and we helped these people be able to get through the cold, get through the winter. He only had maybe about 3 or 4 gallons of gas even left at his place, and we had a few gas cans and one thing and another, and we filled those up, you know, so that they had a little bit of gas. They just stayed home. They just stayed where they were, 37 miles from town. And the only gas that they used was for an old International 4x4 to get around the place there to do things. They had, they had what they needed in the way of, some heating fuel and wood cut to be able to heat their home, be able to, but these were really hard times. I'm gonna let my wife talk to you about the cold. She's gonna sit here. She's gonna talk for a moment about the cold.
So more cold, all of Wyoming that year, and as near as we can recollect, it was probably 1962, January, February. I lived down on a ranch with my family, my dad, my mother, my sister, and I, southwest of Laramie, 22 miles. And to set the scene of my cold story is that, first of all, it had been cold for so long. Dad had been out doctoring animals, and because of the cold, his hand slipped when he was earmarking a newborn calf, and the newborn calves are earmarked to keep everybody's livestock marked. And he slipped and cut one of his fingers. And later on, he developed severe blood poisoning, and we had to take him to the hospital in the middle of a really bad snowstorm and a real bad cold. And Mom had to drop us off at our teacher's house. Now, our teacher lived in Laramie, 20 miles from the schoolhouse, and it was a one-room schoolhouse that my sister and I went to school at. My sister, when she started school in first grade, no kindergarten, The school had been closed for 13 years. They opened it for her, and so there was just her and the teacher the first year she was in school. And I joke with her, I tell her, you're not as smart as you think you are. You had one-on-one tutoring for 8 hours a day. She read at a 6th grade level at the end of 1st grade. The next year, the neighbor boy and her were the entire student body. And then finally, when she was in 3rd grade, I started 1st grade. So there was 3 of us that year. And along in 1st grade, 2nd grade, there were 3 other students, some relatives of ours that were also at the ranch for a while, and a few other kids. But for the most part, it was the Boyd Lilly kids. And in the time that my sister and I went to school there, I went there from my 1st grade through part of 4th grade. My sister first through almost all of, or part of 6th grade. And it was a one-room schoolhouse that had a teacherage and a kitchenette and an outhouse. But the folks knew that when the weather was bad, the teacher would come out there on Monday morning and stay through Friday night because the roads could be very atrocious and might not be able to get back and forth. So he would just, the teacher at that time was a man, Mr. Unruh, and he would stay there at the teacherage. So in this period of time, Dad, like I said, got blood poisoning. Mom dropped us off at the teacher's house. It was on a weekend so we'd have some care. And so when Dad was in the hospital a couple of days, brought him home. I had 2 Mom's parents, my dad's mom and stepfather, took turns coming to the ranch to help with chores. There was a young man and his wife that were also there. But Mom could not take over Dad's work. He was the foreman, he ran things. And so about that time too, just before he got sick, the team of horses that he was using to pull the sled with to feed all the cattle were getting worn out. They were just exhausted. So he went to the neighbor's house to call. We didn't have a phone, and called the boss in Nebraska and said, I need another team. So the boss found a really good team of mules, and Dad had never worked with mules, and he was not really impressed. Anyhow, Earl got really stuck, and the roads were drifting so bad, and he got really stuck. So he walked to the ranch, and Dad drove the other team back to the truck. They unloaded the mules, hitched them up, and Dad was really dubious, but they worked great. So in all of this, we had the team to get around to feed the livestock. That was their main job because the cattle need fed. It was so darn cold. They were being fed twice a day rather than once a day, and constantly out there just making sure they were all okay. Dad gets a blood poisoning. He comes home. Grandparents took turns coming back and forth to help with chores and to help as they could. And so one morning, woke up, like up here, where Randy was, it was 56 below. And Mom and my grandmother probably tried to get vehicles started to get us to school because they knew that 2 miles away, the teacher was there, he was snowed in, and they couldn't get us to school. The team and the sled was being used to feed the cattle because they need fed. And so just like good parents do, they bundled up their kids, and they bundled us up good. I mean, our eyeballs were showing, and that was it. And my sister's 2 years older, almost 3 years older than me, 2 years in school older, and very responsible. Mom and Dad weren't worried about them, so they bundled us up, said go to school. And we'd walk to school many, many, many times. And contrary to what my sons might say, it was not uphill all the way. It was uphill a little bit of the way and downhill and then a little climb. They think Mom exaggerates this. I'm not. This is the truth. So we walked to school, and neither one of us, then or even now in our memories, do not remember being cold at all. It was an adventure. We were braving the wilds, and I'm sure, if I remember right, we, would tell little stories along the way. And at about a quarter of a mile to the school, before we got to school, Mom finally had gotten a small Massey Ferguson tractor started. It doesn't have a cab, it's just an open tractor. And I don't know how she managed to drive that there to school and back, because just that quarter of a mile to school, where we stood on the back of the PO bar, was extremely cold, because you're going 5 miles an hour at 56 below. But before Mom had caught up with us, the neighbor about 3 miles away had seen these little dots out there along the road, got the binoculars out, and yep, the boy girl's walking to school. So she called KJO Radio, which is out of Laramie, to the morning, call-in show, and said, well, the boy girls are tough, they're walking to school, it's 56 below zero here. Now, do not do this day and age. You did that, you'd never, ever, ever, ever see your kids again, ever. Maybe for visitation rights or something, but you'd never see your kids again. But for my sister and I, it's a rite of passage. We did this, and we're tough, and so don't complain to me about the cold, because it's not 56 below yet, although east of us today, there have been temperatures with the wind chill that it's been 56 below, so I'll give them credit for that. And so we walked there and did the school. By that time, it was the part of the day when school gets out that the team, the mule team, the horse team, they rested some, so my grandfather and Mom, and probably Andy, the hired guy that worked with my dad, came and got us on the sled and the team, and that's where we went. And by that time, it was probably in the, I don't know, minus 30s or something, but we have a picture of my dad and Andy somewhere along in that period of weeks where it was so cold and they're keeping the horses and mules in the barn, and where normally they would be out most of the time, but they were in the barn all the time because they were working so hard. They had to take an axe and chop out the remains, the manure, and chop that out, the hay that they'd stomped on and bedded, because they couldn't pick it up with a fork, they couldn't pick it up anyway, but chop it out and then pick up great big chunks, I mean big chunks, huge chunks of this manure and hay, and throw it out to thaw later. So that's my cold story, and thank you very much. Merry Christmas. We appreciate all of you very much. God bless. Bye-bye.
We had a neighbor lived about 3 3/4 miles east of us. Now this man, I knew him, got to know him. He was a fairly old man. At that time, he was in his latter 60s, and he was retired. He retired from predator control. He was actually the first man on predator control after World War I in Yellowstone Park. He was transferred after quite a number of years from there to Mount McKinley in Alaska, predator control. He ran trap lines. He hunted wolves in Mount McKinley country, and he traveled with a dog sled. And many, many days, very, very cold. They would get mail. They would get mail once a month. There would be somebody that come around on dog sled and bring mail. Many, many years ago to that part of the country. And it was a very cold morning, and it was, heading towards noon or something like that, and he happened to meet the fellow that delivered mail in that part of the country, going the other direction, his dog sled. They stopped for a conversation for a few minutes and to receive his mail, and on the upright, where you hold on to the dog sled on the upright, this fellow's name was Ted. He had a thermometer, and on that thermometer that Ted looked at it, said 72 below zero. Now these guys were bundled up. They both wore Ugrit CO mucklucks. Now this was a muckluck, a big muckluck that had 2 half-inch layers of felt innersole in the mucklucks. And they wore 4 pair of the heaviest wool socks that there were inside of these mucklucks. These mucklucks tied just below the knee, and heavy parkas, fur-lined parkas. Not only fur-lined, but fur on the outside. Break the wind, and one thing another. This is how these people dress, just like Eskimos. Just like Eskimos dress to keep warm, and so forth. And as they were chatting, they heard drone of an airplane engine. And I don't know as though they actually saw the plane, but they heard this aircraft. And later on in the day, latter part of the afternoon, 4 o'clock or something like that, Ted got into his cabin, and he had a Citizens Band radio. And after he got himself kind of warmed up and got something warm to drink, heated something and warm to drink, turned on a Citizens Band radio to see if there was anything that he could learn on the radio. And he learned on this radio broadcast that this aircraft had crashed. The airplane held Will Rogers, Wiley Post. It seems as though to me that there was one other person on that aircraft. They were all killed. Now Ted really tells some stories, some real factual stories such as this, and I would visit with him a few days every year in the winter. I stopped by to visit when I was trapping, because this was a retired trapper, retired predator hunter, and he would tell me about some of his experiences, in the backcountry. And I might add that he was the man that eradicated the wolves after World War I out of Yellowstone Park. And he was doing the same thing when he went up to Mount McKinley in Alaska. Eradicate wolves up there to save wildlife and one thing another. Times have sure changed. Now we've got wolves destroying our wildlife, destroying it forever, never come back. And would never have thought, either he or I, that we'd either see such a miserable situation that we're in today all across the country with this wolf situation. It's completely out of control. Predators more important than the actual wildlife. Predators, in some instances, more important than man himself that oversees these animals. That's basically my cold stories.